Good afternoon. My name is Kate Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the New Israel Fund Australia. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight or this afternoon. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the East Kulin Nations as the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm calling in from today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the New Israel Fund, we exist to raise funds to support human rights and civil rights organizations in Israel, and we've distributed millions of dollars to dozens of Israeli civil society organizations with the mission of advancing a just and democratic Israel which upholds equality for all, as envisioned in Israel's Declaration of Independence. It has been an extraordinary week in the history of Australia's relationship with Israel and with what will one day become the state of Palestine. On Monday, the Australian government announced it will recognise a Palestinian state at the September UN General Assembly. For many Jews in Australia and across the diaspora, this issue resonates deeply. It raises complex questions about identity, values, historical responsibility, and the role of governments and civil society in supporting peace and self-determination. Within the Australian Jewish community, it has prompted a wide range of responses, from cautious support to strong opposition. And I'm sure you've all been speaking about it over the weekend and at your Friday night Shabbat dinners. We are holding this afternoon's session to learn more about the history and context of this decision. And in order to do so, we've reached out to three well-known figures within our NIF community whom we trust and have come to learn from, to shed further light on this decision. Our panel features two leading voices from the region who you met recently earlier in the year, Dr. Gershon Baskin, a veteran Israeli peace negotiator and political analyst, and Samer Sinijwali, a respected Palestinian policy expert and civil society leader. Samer is the head of international Israeli and diplomatic relations for the Fatah Shadow Leadership and the chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund. Together, they will explore the realities on the ground and the symbolic and practical implications of recognition. The conversation will be moderated by international lawyer Dr. Michelle Lesh, who will guide this conversation. And she's also a member of the International Council of the New Israel Fund, so is close to our family. A little bit of housekeeping. Samer is sitting in an airport lounge somewhere and will dash off to a flight about halfway through this conversation. So he apologizes, we apologize in advance. And we should have a few moments for questions at the end, but just a warning in case we run out of time. But with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Michelle Lesh to continue this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Kate. It's a privilege to facilitate this conversation about Australia's plan to recognise a Palestinian state with Palestinian civil society leader Samer Sinijwali and veteran Israeli peace negotiator Dr. Gershon Baskin. These two people have worked tirelessly together and individually to bring about the prospect for an alternative future to the current nightmare reality that Palestinians and Israelis are enduring. And in that future, they see an Israeli and a Palestinian state. And there couldn't be two people better placed to help us make sense of the implications of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's announcement last week that Australia will recognise the state of Palestine at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September to contribute to, as he says, international momentum towards a two-state solution, a ceasefire in Gaza, and release of the hostages. Now, Australia has joined France, Canada, and Britain in signalling recognition of Palestine. The US has expressed hostility, and Ambassador Huckabee has expressed disgust at Australia's announcement. The Australian announcement came in the context of Israel's plan to take over Gaza City, In response, the Australian and the New Zealand Prime Ministers issued a joint statement that any move to take control of Gaza City risks violating international law. Now, I think that's enough by way of introduction. I know you're all very keen to hear from these two speakers, so we'll go straight to the discussion now. Now, I have three big questions that we will dig into as deeply as time allows. What does recognition mean? What will it make any difference? And does it matter that Hamas will claim credit and say that this is the fruit of the October 7 atrocities? So we'll start with, what does recognition mean? Because most people assume that whether Palestine becomes a state will be a function of future negotiations. That's the basis, at least in Australia, of the opposition party's threat to overturn recognition if it were to become elected. So can you both explain in what sense Palestine is already a state capable of being recognised? Because people assume that recognition must be of something that already exists. And in your response, I'm hoping that you'll address some of the criteria under international law that makes a state. And those criteria are defined territory, permanent population, effective government, and the ability to enter into foreign relations and have relative independence from other states. So Samir, do you want to respond first?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be invited again by NIF to speak to the border Jewish community and to the Australian community. I think, first of all, this step on the diplomatic level is symbolic. There will be no implication on the ground. Whether one state or 190 states recognize the state of Palestine, if they don't include the state of Israel, this does not mean anything. For me, as a Palestinian, the most important state that I should work very hard to get its recognition is the state of Israel. But this step has been seen and named by the Israeli media as a diplomatic tsunami. I think even when France started exploring the opportunity of organizing such an international conference within the framework of the United Nations, they did not believe they will get to around 20 countries that will join them in recognizing the state of Palestine. And I think this recognition is not, I can see it as not more in support to the Palestinian, but more in a reaction to what's happening in Gaza. The kind of solidarity that the whole world has expressed toward Israel on the 7th of October. On the 7th of October, we Palestinians, we were barbarians. We were ISIS. We were, yes, because we have done terrible things. And I say we, because, yes, it's Hamas, it's not me, but again, it's stick to the Palestinian. Whatever we will do in the collective memory of history and the world, we were barbarian on the 7th of October. Now, the reaction of Israel, the duration of that reaction, the level of violence and the level of victims and suffer on the human suffer on the Palestinian side during the war has caused a lot of reaction from the world. And I see this recognition as reaction. And I think sometimes you need a little bit, even as a pro-Israeli, even that camp of pro-Israeli should see this reaction from the international community as an alternative to maybe more severe procedures like sanctions, for example. The way the whole world reacted to Russia, for example, in its invasion to Ukraine was in complete sanctions and etc. And the world does not want to take this path against Israel. So some countries, including France, Australia, nobody can say that these countries are not friends of Israel. Their history shows that they are true friends of Israel. The nuclear program of Israel was developed by the French. The French has engaged in wars with Israel, defending Israel in the 50s, including during after the 7th of October in defending Israel from the attacks of Iran. So these countries are real friends of Israel, but they have lost their patience on why this war is going on until today. And they wanted to deliver a message. And so that's how the recognition of the state of Palestine came into action. Now it's meaningless because on the ground, the reality for Palestinians will be the same. These countries will not be able to open embassies for the Palestinians somewhere in Ramallah or East Jerusalem or Gaza. These countries will not be able, you mentioned the external relations. The state of Palestine is in practice is not able to function full independence in external relations because it is dependent on Israel, and Israel controls the borders and etc. But it is symbolic, and I think it puts again on the table that the international community insists that the only solution for this conflict is the two-state solution. And I think they are in the right direction, because one way, Israel needs to be a democratic Jewish state. It's the right of the Jewish people to have their own Jewish democratic state. And this will not be able to happen if Israel continues controlling millions of Palestinians. So separation needs to happen. And the only way I can see it can happen is within the framework of the two-state solution. Now, allow me, maybe if you want a little bit to talk about the three questions together, because they are in a way related. There is some claim that especially the position of the Israeli government expressed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister, everybody in the cabinet, that these countries are giving a price. They are rewarding Hamas on what they have done on the 7th of October. And I think this assumption is wrong, because Hamas never wanted two-state solution. Hamas wanted to eliminate Israel. It's people like me on the Palestinian side and people like Gershon on the Israeli side who spend their whole life trying to work to advance the two-state solution. People who believe in coexistence, in the right of the other side to equally exist, in the right of the Israelis to live in security, in the right of Palestinians to live in freedom. So this is a punishment for Hamas, because Hamas never wanted a two-state solution. And especially when the declaration of this country insists that the state of Palestine will not include Hamas. So this is the most severe punishment.
Samir, can you talk to us a bit about the concept of effective government and the kind of internal component of Palestinian relations and how this would affect the development? As I mentioned, it's one of the criteria for statehood, but we also know just practically on the ground how things operate. Could you give us a bit of an insight into the...
Yeah, well, let me remind everybody, Michelle, that the 165 countries that recognize the state of Israel recognize it without defined borders. Now, Israel does not have defined borders. So the same applies on the state of Palestine. We also don't have borders now. And I think we invite, once Israel defines its borders, automatically the state of Palestine will have the borders. Okay,
well,
so
some legal experts say that there's international consensus that the territory is presumptively defined by the pre-1967 borders, which would encompass the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza. But as you said, the precise borders remain to be agreed upon. How do you think Palestinians would feel about that? Can it be assumed that it would be more or less the green line, which leaves Palestinians permanently dissatisfied with only 22% of Mandate Palestine?
Well, the two-state solution is definitely based only on the borders of 67. But we shouldn't say that it is exactly the borders of 1967. There should be some kind of flexibility, because in all the negotiations, in all the proposals of the two-state solution that came, including, for example, let us take as an example the most recent one, which is the joint proposal by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Palestinian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Nasser Qudwa. They said borders of 67 with 4 to 5% swap of land. 82% of the settlers are present over 5% of the West Bank. This part can be annexed to Israel, where 82% of the settlers will be part of the state of Israel. We can solve a major issue there, which is the issue of settlers and settlement. So it's not exactly, but it's around the borders of 67. And it has been, you know, the national project for Palestinians since 1988, when Arafat announced the declaration of independence in Algeria in 1988. It was clear that the majority of Palestinians are signing into this two-state solution based on the borders of 1967. Now, you can find a lot of people who are raising the slogan of from the river to the sea. From the Palestinian side, mainly it's the Palestinian diaspora, people who are far away from the conflict and I can say detached from reality. But unfortunately, Oslo.
Yours?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Oslo also, we have seen recently that the Israeli Prime Minister has associated himself with the vision of Greater Israel. So suddenly now there is somebody on the Israeli side who says, well, you know, from the river to the sea is something small. Our slogan is from the river to the river. Okay, so, but I think this is illusions. None of these projects are going to happen, because whatever we want to do, there are on the land 7 million Israeli Jews, 7 million Palestinians, and nothing is going to change.
So what kind of
We
state on the ground do you envisage? Will it involve complete separation or divorce, as Amos Oz has put it and David Grossman agrees, or will it be a confederation? Both, as you have alluded to, both have problems in regard to their realism. The separation model looks to many people impossible because, as you mentioned, the settlers. The confederation model faces obstacles of massive lack of trust in one another by Palestinians and Israelis, and that's why Oz and Grossman have insisted on complete separation. I've heard both of you emphasize and speak very movingly about the need for trust. You've said that you believe that it's from the generation of Israelis who protested about the conditions of civil society before October 7 that leaders will come with imagination and courage and take the risks necessary to establish two states on the ground. So can both of you share with us what kind of state on the ground you envisage?
Well, first of all, I am, as a Palestinian, I might be happy to see more states recognizing the state of Palestine, but this does not mean that this is what should be done. I think we Palestinians should focus into trying to convince the Israelis in that option. And currently the Israelis have a lot of doubts whether this could be something they could sign to. They have doubts, the majority of them, out of security concerns. There could be maybe 10 to 15% of the Israelis who are supporting the ideology of Greater Israel. But the majority of Israelis, they believe they could live, or they want to live in a two-state reality, but they don't trust the Palestinians. They have seen that Gaza, instead of being developed as from the Palestinian side as a neighboring state that has good relation, it has developed into a territory that has executed the 7th of October. So this security concern is there. Our task should be, we as Palestinians, to take certain steps to show that to the Israelis that regardless this past of uncertainty, that regardless these negative experience that they have had in the past, from the second intifada to the 7th of October to whatever you want, the Palestinians don't have the intention to continue have security threat on Israel. That we understand that this conflict is two words. One, from the Israeli side, it's security. From the Palestinian side, it's freedom. That our obligation is to develop a Palestinian strategy that puts the Israeli security in its bases, because then the Israelis will be able to have steps that will open the doors for recognizing the state of Palestine as a reality. It's only the Israelis who can make this happen. It doesn't matter really if the whole world will recognize the state of Palestine. We need 51% of the Israelis in the coming elections to vote to a government that is willing to explore this option and go into the path that will lead to this option. And this needs trust. This conflict is not really complicated when it comes to the scenarios on the ground. How can we solve the issue of Jerusalem or the borders or the settlements or the right of return? This conflict, it is complicated because there is a lot of hard feelings in the hearts of Palestinians and Israelis. Unfortunately, we hate each other. Most of the Israelis and Palestinians have a cocktail of feeling in their hearts: pain, grief, mistrust, hatred, incitement. It's there. So unless we are able to defeat these feelings, unless we are able to gain trust, unless we are able to open our hearts and feel the pain on the other side, and open our minds and try to see this conflict from the eyes of the other, we will not be able to exit this conflict. So we need to focus now more on the ground. We Palestinians need to outreach to Israelis. We need to talk to them, because even if somehow this diplomatic move is seen by some people as some kind of pressure on Israel, the Israelis don't respond good to pressure. They become more stubborn. The best way is to persuade the Israelis. So what's happening on the diplomatic arena is something, but what should happen on the ground is more important. How can we create reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians that will allow them to accept a political horizon? I think we should focus there.
There are quite a few questions coming through in the Q&A in the chat box that are asking whether you see that if there are leaders both on the Palestinian and on the Israeli side to fulfill what you see as the only option in the future. Do you see leadership?
I know very well the Israelis. I know very well the Palestinians. I meet an average of 300 Israelis a week. And I think also Gershon knows very well the Palestinians. He can talk later about the Palestinians. Both Israelis and Palestinians, the majority, are willing to sign in for a political horizon, are willing to share the land on a model of two-state solution. Even after the tragedies of the 7th of October and the war, I think what has happened on the 7th of October and during the last 21 months, 22 months, maybe did not distance us from political horizon, maybe brought us closer to a political horizon, because now we are sure that first, this conflict cannot be managed. It should be solved, and we need to find a way out. Second, we have seen that maybe in a way or another, this conflict from the 7th of October until now has been a war between the worst of both people. Hamas has crossed all the red lines when they have committed their atrocities on the 7th of October. Me, as Palestinians, as a Palestinian, I feel shameful and I feel guilt also. We have kidnapped kids, we have killed kids, we have kidnapped older women, we have done something that I have never thought that we can do. This is not our morals, not on a national level, not on a religious level. This is not Islam, this is not patriotism, this is not that we might claim to represent. And also, I think now there are Israelis who are calling to stop service. They are calling Israelis not to go into army for Gaza. And there are now, you can see on media in Israel, people are discussing in studios whether what's happening in Gaza and the way the world is reacting to it, whether this is a communication failure or is it a moral failure. So, okay, it's legitimate. Both of us need to criticize our own wrongdoings. We crossed all the red lines, and I think this proves that we need a little bit to return back to whom we are. There is common humanity that brings us together. Before we are Israelis and Palestinians, we are human beings, and this is genuine. Nobody can deny it or question it. And this common humanity will help us to overcome the difficulties. Will help us to build trust. We are just lacking leadership. I can say, to summarize, we are only one election away from peace. We are only one leader away from peace. If in the coming elections, and most probably we Palestinians will have elections in 2026, the Israelis definitely they will have elections in 2026. If we in our elections, we defeat Hamas, we bring up a young, energetic, responsible, accountable, transparent leadership that understands Israelis and deliver positive message to the Israelis. Stop lecturing the Israelis on international law and try to outreach them on more human level. Be genuine and sincere to say, well, violence is part of the history. We should talk. We should convince you, not pressure you. I think it will create good dynamics. It will help the Israelis also to go to elections and vote to a leadership that is opening the doors for such a development. I'm really very happy to be with you, but I need to apologize and go to catch up a flight. I'm going back to Tel Aviv. I have been in a conference in Europe, and I'm looking forward to come in person again with my partner and my brother and my friend Gershon to Australia and meet all of you again. Thank you so much for everything and for this opportunity. And let's see how things will develop. I hope that we are so close to a political horizons and to a final peace in the region.
Thank you, Samir.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining us
Bye-bye.
and have a good flight. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Gershon, for waiting there patiently and restraining yourself from piping up. And I know you have a lot to say about all of this, and you and Samir in particular have a dynamic between the two of you. So I'm sure it won't be hard for you to step in where he finished, and maybe just share with us some of your thoughts on what it means to recognize a Palestinian state and the type of state you envisage, and whether there was anything else that Samir mentioned about potential future leadership that you either agree or disagree on.
Okay, thank you. Good morning from Jerusalem. It's a pleasure to be with NIF in Australia again. We had a great trip when we were there a few months ago. Let me start by saying that today is day 681 since October 7th. Today is a national strike in Israel called by the hostage families, called by 3 women, mothers and wives of hostages who are still in Gaza. And this is a tragedy that's been with us now since almost 2 years now. And the big change that's happened in the protest movement in Israel with regard to the hostages is that now this movement is clearly calling not for the release of the hostages only, but for ending the war. And more and more people have been talking in these protests about the horrible things that Israel has been doing in Gaza. And here I jump on to what Samer said, 100%. A lot of the reaction that we're seeing around the world with regard to the recognition of Palestine comes from the horror that the world is seeing in Gaza, what the Israeli people don't see because our media doesn't show it. But the rest of the world sees it every single day. Every time you open your social media or you open your television, the world is seeing scenes that we in Israel don't see. I came to the two-state solution as a Zionist youth movement leader. I was the president of Young Judea in the 1970s, the largest Zionist youth movement in the United States at the time. I think it still is. And my conclusion after coming to the realization already when I was 16 years old that Israel is my home is that after spending a year here in Israel between high school and university, of understanding that we weren't alone here. There was another people here. And in my mind, it didn't seem logical to even imagine that the state of Israel could be the nation state of the Jewish people and democratic at the same time, when Israel is occupying another people within its midst who don't enjoy the democracy that Israel promises its citizens and are not Jewish. So where do they fit in? So in 1975, I wrote my first op-ed article in a Jewish newspaper out of California, in which I said that the Zionist solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the establishment of a Palestinian state next to Israel in the territories that Israel occupied in 1967. It seemed so logical to me that I didn't understand why, at that point, there were only 2 or 3% of Israelis who thought that that was the solution. It was the solution in 1947 when the United Nations voted for partition. The partition plan was a two-state solution on borders much less suitable for Israel than the borders that would exist should a Palestinian state really be established next to Israel today. It's been the only solution that's been debated and negotiated over the years, even though one of the big mistakes of the Oslo Agreement and the Oslo peace process was that they failed to be explicit about what the end game was. Everyone who was involved in the negotiations during the Oslo period knew that the unstated end game was a two-state solution, was the creation of the state of Palestine. And one of the reasons why it failed is because it was never explicit. It has to be explicit today. As Samer said, there are several million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinian Arabs living between the river and the sea. And if we honestly want Israel to be the democratic nation state of the Jewish people, there is only one solution for this conflict, because the alternative is not the continuation of the status quo. October 7th should have been the wake-up call for all of us, where at that point, we should have understood that you can't occupy another people for 56 years and expect to live in peace. You can't lock 2.2 million people in a territory like Gaza with 80% poverty and expect to be quiet. The solution has to be either the continuation of the status quo, which is not a solution, or what's called the one-state solution, which means that Israel is no longer the nation state of the Jewish people. These people who are so-called friends of Palestine, who talk about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, are not friends of the Palestinian people, because they're damning the Palestinian people to live in a reality, which is a one-state reality, which is we have today, where Palestinians will never have freedom and dignity and security. That's the one-state reality. There has to be a two-state solution, because for over 100 years, what have we been fighting about here? We have been fighting about our willingness to fight, to die, and to kill, to have a territorial expression of our identity. That's what we want. This conflict is about land and identity. And it's about the ability to take a piece of land and say it's ours. We give our identity to it, we take our identity from it. And this is what both sides have said in this conflict for 100 years now. If you read the Israeli Declaration of Independence, a beautiful, brilliant document that paragraph by paragraph details why the Jewish people have a right to a state of their own, a right to express their identity on a territory which they declare is theirs historically and religiously and sentimentally, and we give our identity to the land of Israel and we take our identity from it. The Palestinian Declaration of Independence, which was issued by Yasser Arafat in November of 1988 and written by Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian national poet, modeled the Palestinian Declaration of Independence on the Israeli Declaration. And paragraph by paragraph, he delineated why the Palestinian people have a right to a state of their own, how they're connected to the land of Palestine, how they give their identity to it and take their identity from it. Mahmoud Darwish was a lot more honest in his drafting of the declaration than Ben-Gurion was in drafting the Israeli declaration, because the Israeli declaration, when it gets to the paragraph of the international legitimacy for the creation of the State of Israel, Ben-Gurion quotes the partition resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, Resolution 181 from November 29, 1947, and talks about the United Nations decided to create a Jewish state in the land of Israel. Mahmoud Darwish writes the same resolution as the international legitimacy, but he says it correctly. He said the United Nations decided to create an Arab state and a Jewish state in the land of Palestine. And this is the Palestinian vision of the two-state solution back in 1988, when Arafat made the ultimate compromise of saying that we accept a Palestinian state, not in all of historic Palestine, not from the river to the sea, but on 22% of the land, as you, Michel, stated. In fact, the political statement that came with the Declaration of Independence indicated that the Palestinians were recognizing Israel on 78% of the land of Israel. And in September 13, 1993, when the Oslo Agreement was signed, Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin exchanged letters. The Palestinian letter to Israel was an explicit recognition of the state of Israel and its right to defend itself. Unfortunately, the letter issued from Rabin to Arafat was not a parallel letter. It said that the state of Israel recognized the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. It wasn't a parallel neutral recognition, which is another one of the reasons why we are where we're at. I would say it's really important to look at the issue of recognition of the state of Palestine today, also within the context of the conditions that Emmanuel Macron and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, put on the Palestinian leader before they were willing to come out and say, we will recognize the state of Palestine. And Mahmoud Abbas signed a letter. I don't think he wrote it. It doesn't really matter. He signed it. And the letter is very, very, very clear that the state of Palestine will be a demilitarized state, that the state of Palestine will have one sovereign and one gun under the authority of the civil elected government, that the state of Palestine will conduct national elections for its parliament and its president, that the state of Palestine will engage in educational reform to remove incitement and anti-Semitism and all the negative narratives that we know that exist within the Palestinian textbooks, modeling afterwards what the United Arab Emirates did, what the Saudis are doing today. He also indicated that they would end what the Jewish world has called the pay-to-slay policy, that they would no longer pay convicted terrorists salaries to their families for acts of terrorism against the Jews. These are things that the Jewish world in Israel has demanded for years. Mahmoud Abbas made that obligation in the context of the international community's recognition of the state of Palestine. No, for the Palestinian Authority.
Just to interject, a lot of those, as part of what the Australian government have said, are the commitments that the Palestinian Authority has agreed to, were they to recognize the state of Palestine.
Right. You know, when you travel around Palestine, and here I mean specifically the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority doesn't exist. on every single government building, it doesn't say Al-Sulta al-Falastini or Sultan Wataniya al-Falastiniya, the Palestinian National Authority. It says Dawlat Palestine. It says the State of Palestine. The business cards of all the people from the Palestinian Authority say the State of Palestine. They have been trying to create a reality in the mindset of Palestinians that the State of Palestine exists, but it's an occupied state. They tried to get UN membership as a state, but of course, that has to go through the Security Council, and the United States vetoed it. What they were able to attain in the General Assembly is recognition of Palestinian statehood, and Palestine is recognized in the United Nations as an observer state, not a member state. Much like the Vatican and Switzerland were for many years, they were observer states in the United Nations, which allows the State of Palestine to sign on to international conventions, something that angered the governments of Israel when they started doing it. But essentially, that's a really important step in international law, because when a state signs on to an international convention, they're essentially giving away a piece of their sovereignty to a larger body. If you become a member of the World Trade Organization, you're limiting what you can do on issues of trade. If you're a member of the World Food Program, you're an active member of UNICEF, of UNESCO, of all these other international conventions. You are recognizing that you are part of an international community, and you are obligated by international law to observe the common practices of how states interact with each other. So the actual conversion.
I just want to emphasize that point for people, because when people are trying to grapple with whether recognition is symbolic or more than symbolic, it has been pointed out by a number of international lawyers, most recently by Philippe Sands, that even though many people see this as symbolic, in terms of symbolism, he sees it as a game changer, because once you recognize Palestinian statehood, and we should say that now up to 140 states have done so, you essentially put Palestine and Israel on the same level footing in terms of treatment under international law. And there are a lot of implications for that, both in terms of the war now in Gaza and the current rules that regulate that war, and also more generally on the global scale. If Palestine is seen to be a state, with that comes obligations and certain treatment. And there's been a lot of questions in the chat, and it's something that both you and Samer alluded to when you spoke about whether, in fact, recognition is just symbolic. Samer spoke about the issues with the settlers, and he also mentioned sanctions, because people who support as well as those who oppose recognition, one of the worries is that it's only symbolic, and some, especially on the left, fear that it will allow Western governments to act as though they did something when in fact they have done nothing serious to stop the war in Gaza. You've mentioned the war in Gaza. Israel has shown ruthless determination to do as it wants, disregarding international opinion and international law. And in direct response to pronouncements of recognition, there has been, and this again was raised in the chat, Israeli Finance Minister, as you would know, Bezalel Smotrich, has announced that Israel will build 3,400 new settlements in the E1 area, which would cut off northern West Bank from the southern regions, effectively making a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital impossible. And I just want to read what he said. He said, "Those in the world trying to recognize a Palestinian state will get an answer from us on the ground. They'll keep talking about a Palestinian dream, and we will continue to build a Jewish reality, a reality that buries the idea of a Palestinian state because there's nothing to recognize and no one to recognize it." So until now, you know that Israel has refrained from construction in the E1 area due to strong international criticism, particularly from the US. So my question to you, which is a broader question about the implications of recognition, is how does the world stop this? Is there not now a need for much more serious action by Western nations in the hope of isolating the US sufficiently for them to come on board? Sanctions, for example, actually to force Israel to do what it has so far not been prepared to do? What are your views on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand the context of what Smotrich said about building an E1, and because it's not only the physical dimension of preventing the establishment of a state of Palestine, the political program explicitly put on the table by Smotrich and others from that camp, which is now the same camp as the Netanyahu camp, is the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. This is what they're doing in Area C today. Since the beginning of the war, more than 40 new settlements have been built in the West Bank. They've been built mostly in Area C, but now they are going into Area B, the village areas of Palestine. Smotrich is the minister responsible for the civil administration. And for the first time in Israel's history, when they appointed a civilian minister from the government of Israel to be the governor of the occupied territories, Israel essentially effectively removed itself from the confines of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which are the laws, the international laws for governing an occupied territory. What that meant is that when Smotrich became the civilian minister responsible for the civil administration, which was a part of the army and is now part of the Israeli government, annexation began. When the International Court of Justice simply heard evidence of intent from quoting Israeli ministers, Israeli politicians, Israeli media personnel that demonstrated intent for ethnic cleansing, that demonstrated intent of Jewish superiority in every aspect of life between the river and the sea, there is no brainer here for the international legal system to come to the conclusion that the occupation is illegal, it is no longer temporary, Israel is engaged in annexation and ethnic cleansing. And for those people who want to get into the most difficult parts of international law for us, Israelis and Jews, is the whole question of genocide. Now, I want to be very clear that what's happening, and I don't want to get into this discussion, but I just want to make a point. What's happening in Gaza is not the Holocaust. It's not what the Nazis did to the Jews. But there is an international convention on the prevention of genocide that defines what genocide is. What Israel has done in Gaza, what Israel is continuing to do in Gaza, is the erasure of a civilization. Israel has made Gaza uninhabitable for its 2.2 million people. More than 2 million people are homeless. Israel has removed, demolished schools, universities, public buildings, libraries, mosques, churches, roads, electrical system, water system, sewage system. Gaza has been made uninhabitable. And by the definitions of the convention, and I think most international lawyers agree to this, this is what is defined as genocide within the convention. And the convention is for the prevention of genocide, which obligates all the countries of the world that are signatories to the convention to prevent it. And countries which are not taking action to prevent it are complicit with the genocide, which opens the door to exactly what you're saying, Michelle, that recognizing Palestine is not the prevention of genocide. Sanctions, giving very clear messages to Israel that as long as this war in Gaza is going on, we are sanctioning Israel. We are ceasing our trade. We are not recognizing, we're sending the ambassador home. We are not allowing Israelis to visit our country, visa-free access, which you don't have in Australia anyway, but in a lot of countries in the world, there are visa-free entry to Israelis. There needs to be severe actions taken to end this war in Gaza, because what we're doing in Gaza is unacceptable, to put it mildly. So recognizing Palestine here is a symbolic state, and it has nothing to do with rewarding Hamas. It is not a victory for Hamas. It is a victory for those people.
That's a big question on people's mind, is whether this is
rewarding. Yeah, that's very good propaganda. It sounds good.
You've written about
because the Hamas people, at the end of this war, after even 100,000 people are killed in Gaza, and it's 30,000 babies and infants who are killed in Gaza, and Hamas is destroyed and decimated, Hamas will stand up and say, we won. This is the nature of the beast. No one in Israel, nor the Palestinians, nor Hamas will declare a surrender. They're all going to declare victory. When we have to be more intelligent about the reality and understand that there are no winners in this war. No one has won this war. There is no victor here. We have both lost, and we've lost terribly. We have two societies that are living in trauma. We haven't even begun to become post-trauma. And Israel, which is a modern first world state, doesn't have anywhere the needs, the ability to deal with the mental health issues that are developing in this country, and the mental health needs that people are going to have from being post-traumatic. We see a sharp increase in the suicide rate of Israeli soldiers coming home from Gaza. This is the beginning of the indication of the trauma that we are living in Israel and the Palestinians. There isn't a single person in Gaza who sleeps at night, who is able to live a normal life, who does not live in fear 24/7. This is not normal. I can tell you as a person who's relatively sane and engaged in this conflict for 47 years that I don't sleep at night. That's how it's affected me physically. And I think I'm one of the more mentally healthy people around me. It affects us all. We need to end this conflict. The war in Gaza needs to be the last Israeli-Palestinian war. And the only way of doing it is ensuring that we have a two-state solution. Palestinians will never have peace, dignity, security, and freedom if Israel doesn't have the same. We can't expect that we can live in peace and freedom and dignity and security, and the Palestinians won't. It will never work that way. There's an equation here, not because we're the same in power and in support internationally, but because the reality is that there are two people living on this land who call it their own. And that's the reality that we need to accept. And the recognition of the state of Palestine is the fastest way of putting Palestinians on a course of reality, of realpolitik, of erasing the river to the sea. Palestine will be free, which both Samar and I said we met with leaders of the Palestinian diaspora in Australia. And we told them this slogan of yours is anti-Palestinian because it helps you to imagine a reality in which Israel does not exist. And that's a reality that's not going to happen. The fastest way for Palestinians to get their freedom and their security and their dignity is by making peace with Israel on the basis of the two-state solution. The international community recognizing it puts it on the right foot. It's very much not enough. But I don't understand how countries like Australia for 20, 30 years can talk about a two-state solution and only recognize one. Be honest to yourselves. If you support a two-state solution, help to make it happen. The issue of Palestinian statehood needs to be off the table of negotiations. We need to negotiate borders, economic relations, security, scientific cooperation, water and the environment, and energy, and a whole list of issues that we need to negotiate. The issue of Palestinian statehood is non-negotiable. It is a sine qua non for the existence of peace. It has to be the starting point of negotiations. So why don't I stop here and then we can...
Sure. There are quite a few questions in the chat that are asking what we Jews in the diaspora can do. And there are also quite a lot of questions about whether you see any alternative leaders, both within the Palestinian Authority or Palestinian Society and within Israel. So do you have any more concrete examples you can offer people before we wrap up?
Yeah. In May of 2021, the Palestinians were supposed to have elections that Mahmoud Abbas canceled. In those elections, 86% of the Palestinians in West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza who were eligible to vote went and registered to vote. The electoral system in Palestine is like the United States. You have to go and register. I don't know what it's like in Australia. In Israel, we don't register to vote. If you're in the population registry, you're above the age of 18, you automatically have the right to vote. In Palestine, people had to do something in order to vote, and 86% of Palestinians went and registered to vote. Not only that, at that time, 36 political parties registered to participate in those elections. This is bewildering. I mean, there's way too many, but it was a festival of democracy where everyone got together with a group of friends and family and colleagues and associates and political partners and put together a list. Not only that, the Palestinian election law deems that 25% minimum of the candidates have to be women. We don't have anything like that in Israel. Look at our parliament today. It's atrocious in terms of representation of women. I think 25% is far too, it's about half of what it needs to be. There has to be 50% women at least in our parliaments. But the Palestinians were taking the steps in the right way. The Palestinians need to reform their election law further, and they need to say that any political party that supports this armed struggle will not be allowed to participate. Mahmoud Abbas said more or less the same thing in his letter to Macron and MBS, when he said that only political parties that support the PLO political line of the two-state solution, recognizing Israel, etc., would be allowed to participate in the elections, meaning that parties like the Islamic Jihad and Hamas would not be allowed to participate in those elections. Are there alternative Palestinian leaders? There are. They're out there. We don't know most of them. Samer tells this great story that 30 years ago, when he was the official secretary of Fatah Youth, he used to meet with Mahmoud Abbas 30 years ago. And Mahmoud Abbas would start his talks with them saying that you people here sitting in this room are the leaders of tomorrow. Samer notes that tomorrow never happened. Mahmoud Abbas is 90 years old in the 20th year of a 4-year term and enjoys almost zero legitimacy amongst his own people. People want elections. Just now,
do you think it's
in
realistic
present time,
that the commitments that the Australian government's asking of Israel will be fulfilled, including having elections, not having Hamas involved in future?
I think there needs to be conditionality on the support of the Palestinians, just as there needs to be conditionality on any kind of relations with the state of Israel. Money given to support the state of Palestine or to help build the state of Palestine or to support the Palestinian Authority need to be conditioned on the Palestinians doing things, not saying words or not signing letters, but actually taking the steps. There's nothing to prevent the Palestinian Authority today from beginning to change its textbooks. Nothing. Support from Australia to Palestine or from any country to Palestine should be conditioned on that, should be conditioned on them changing the election law, should be conditioned on them ensuring, well, there is security coordination and there are a lot of Hamas people sitting in Palestinian Authority prisons, but they need to change this policy of paying terrorists and families of terrorists. Actions need to be taken and support has to be conditioned on them. It's good that the letter was issued. I'm pretty sure the letter was dictated to Mahmoud Abbas by MBS and by Macron, and we need to hold him to the implementation of those commitments.
Well,
two words about leadership, right?
yes.
Just now, with regard, the most pressing issue right now is that in order for Israel to withdraw from Gaza and end the war, there needs to be an alternative Palestinian government in Gaza. Hamas has said repeatedly for more than a year now that they are willing to accept a civilian, professional, technocratic government that they are not part of. The irresponsible Palestinian leadership has not taken real action to make that happen, which enables Netanyahu to say to Donald Trump, look, we're willing to withdraw from Gaza as long as we have security control, but if we leave, Hamas takes over. There are two people now, reputable, reliable, reasonable supporters of peace with Israel have stood up who said they're willing to do the job. One is Nasser al-Qidwa, who was the former foreign minister. He was the PLO representative in the UN for 17 years, the nephew of Yasser Arafat, the one that Samer and I brought together with Ehud Olmert to write this vision paper for the future. The second guy is a guy named Smir Khalili, who's a very respected Palestinian businessman who was one of the creators of the Palestinian Ministry of Finance, negotiated with Israel over many deals, worked in the private sector, most recently was the chairman of the Palestinian Stock Exchange, someone who is very respected locally, internationally, and by Israel. And he stood up and said, and he's been talking to the Arab states, to Jordan, the Saudis, the Egyptians, and others about being the governor for Gaza. These are positive steps. But the real thing is that Palestinians need to go to elections because they haven't had elections in 20 years, and they need to elect their own leaders, whoever they may be, and hopefully they will, as Samer believes, make the right choice.
I hope so.
In Israel, we don't have any great leaders for tomorrow. We all know there's Yair Golan, who's trying to build a coalition of the center left, but we also have people like Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid and Avigdor Lieberman, who are not the kind of leaders that Israel needs for tomorrow. We need much more courageous people who have a vision of Israel living in peace. No longer this vision of Netanyahu of Israel as the villa in the jungle, because we don't live in a jungle anymore. The neighborhood around us is a very nice neighborhood. More than 1 million Israelis have already been to Dubai, and 4 million, 5 million Israelis would love to visit Saudi Arabia. These are the countries that we want to associate with, but we will only be able to do that when we have peace with the Palestinians.
Yes. and hopefully those new leaders on both sides will emerge soon. Time has unfortunately defeated us. I just want to end by reading a quote from Zahava Galon, who has echoed similar sentiments to both you and Samir. And she recently wrote, "Our friends around the world have decided to save us from ourselves and declared their intention to recognize a Palestinian state. According to the government, this is a reward for Hamas. Recognizing a Palestinian state isn't a reward for October 7, nor is it a punishment for 2 years of this crazy government. It's a lifeline. The world looks at us and sees a nation that's trapped in a nightmare and a government that's sacrificing its citizens for a terrifying future. You don't have to live like that, the people of the world are telling us, as they see pictures of the unfathomable destruction and killing in Gaza, which the Israeli media don't show. You don't have to be a country that starves people, commits war crimes, allows pogroms, and abandons its people who have been taken hostage. There's another way. A Palestinian state isn't a perfect solution, but it's the only realistic one. The world is ready to lend a hand. The question is whether we'll keep ignoring its offer." And I think that the demonstrations over the weekend that you may have been a part of in Tel Aviv give us hope that Israelis will accept the offer. And I'd like to end by thanking both you and Samir for this difficult, illuminating, and also inspiring conversation. Your voices and, importantly, your action are what we need now. And of course, we also need the work of NIF, and I want to thank them for hosting this event and for many important events in the past, including bringing both you and Samir, Gershon and Samir, to Australia only a few months ago. So thank you all for joining us this Sunday afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.